Hi, guys. Today we are going to listen to and read along with How Much Land Does a Man Need? A short story by a very famous Russian author, Leo Tolstoy. Now, I know that we're going to call this a short story, but it's probably going to be longer than most of the short stories that you have experienced because it is written by a Russian author. We do not have time to listen to any of his novels because they would take about 3 years to cover. So, I have already explained to you in instructions that you're going to be keeping up with a couple of things as you're listening to this story. One of the things that you're going to keep up with is how much land exactly your protagonist desires. And that is going to go up incrementally as time passes on. The question, how much land does a man need? It's going to be answered through the story. The second thing that I have asked you to keep up with is all of the different ways that the devil is going to utilize the seven deadly sins to ensnare Peckham. In other words, to get his soul, which is the goal of the devil throughout the course of this particular story. I hope that you enjoy How Much Land Does a Man Need? An elder sister came to visit her younger sister in the country. The elder was married to a tradesman in town, the younger to a peasant in the village. As the sisters sat over their tea talking, the elder began to boast of the advantages of town life, saying how comfortably they lived there, how well they dressed, what fine clothes her children wore, what good things they ate and drank, and how she went to the theatre, promenades, and entertainments. The younger sister was piqued, and in turn disparaged the life of a tradesman and stood up for that of a peasant. I would not change my way of life for yours, said she. We may live roughly, but at least we are free from anxiety. You live in better style than we do, but though you often earn more than you need, you are very likely to lose all you have. You know the proverb, loss and gain are brothers twain. It often happens that people who are wealthy one day are begging their bread the next. Our way is safer. Though a peasant's life is not a fat one, it is a long one. We shall never grow rich, but we shall always have enough to eat. The elder sister said sneeringly, Enough! Yes, if you like to share with the pigs and the calves. What do you know of elegance or manners? However much your good man may slave, you will die as you are living, on a dung heap, and your children the same. Well, what of that? Replied the younger. Of course, our work is rough and coarse, but on the other hand, it is sure, and we need not bow to anyone. But you and your towns are surrounded by temptations. Today, all may be right, but tomorrow the evil one may tempt your husband with cards, wine, or women, and all will go to ruin. Don't such things happen often enough? Packham, the master of the house, was lying on top of the stove, and he listened to the women's chatter. I'm going to go ahead and press pause here for a minute. The beginning of the short story very much seems like City Mouse, Country Mouse, and you have a wealthy older sister going to visit her poor younger sister in the country. The older sister comes in, she's just bragging about all the things that she has in her life and what life is like in the city. The younger sister stood up for her way of life very much. She said, "We may never have a lot, but we're going to have what we need." The older sister then took a turn for the almost inappropriate and very argumentative. And she said, However much your good man may slave your husband, you will die as you are living on a dung heap. Do you know what dung is? Well, if you're at home, I guess you can say what you're actually thinking. If you're in my presence, I hope that you're going to say a pile of crap. I'm pretty confident that if my sister ever told me that I was living on a pile of crap, I would tell her that she could exit the house, but the sister doesn't. I guess she's used to it. So Packham is married to the younger sister. Packham is he's the guy who lives in the country. He farms for a living. And so Packham hears the conversation and he says, well, it is perfectly true, thought he. Busy as we are from childhood tilling Mother Earth, we peasants have no time to let any nonsense settle in our heads. Our only trouble is that we haven't land enough. If I had plenty of land, I shouldn't fear the devil himself. The women finished their tea, chatted a while about dress, and then cleared away the tea things and lay down to sleep. But the devil had been sitting behind the oven and had heard all that was said. He was pleased that the peasant's wife had led her husband into boasting, and that he had said that if he had plenty of land he would not fear the devil himself. All right, thought the devil. We will have a tussle. I'll give you land enough, and by means of that land, I will get you into my power. It's kind of like the devil said, bet. And he was like, okay, if you're going to brag about just having enough land, I'll give you plenty, and then I will get your immortal soul. Thus sets up a type of story that we have seen throughout the course of time because people are always aiming to get more than what they actually have. Now, as I explained before, the devil is going to utilize the seven deadly sins to lure Packham into his power. So when you see any of those sins, if you see pride, if you see wrath or anger, if you see envy slash jealousy, if you see those things, go ahead and make a mark. It's possible too that various sins could be seen as two different. Like you could see pride in an action, and somebody else could see envy in an action. That's okay. You don't have to have the exact same tally marks or the exact same charts. But I would challenge you to keep a hold of those. It's going to be helpful later. Close to the village there lived a lady, a small landowner who had an estate of about 300 acres. She had always lived on good terms with the peasants until she engaged as her steward an old soldier who took to burdening the people with fines. However careful Packham tried to be, it happened again and again that now a horse of his got among the lady's oats. Now a cow strayed into her garden. Now his calves found their way into her meadows, and he always had to pay a fine. Packham paid up, but grumbled, and going home in a temper was rough with his family. Wrath. You can go ahead and make a mark. All through that summer, Packham had much trouble because of the steward, and he was even glad when winter came and the cattle had to be stabled. Though he grudged the fodder, that's the food that the animals are eating, though he grudged the fodder when they could no longer graze on the pasture land, at least he was free from anxiety from them. In the winter, the news got about that the lady was going to sell her land and that the keeper of the inn on the high road was bargaining for it. When the peasants heard this, they were very much alarmed. Well, thought they, if the innkeeper gets the land, he will worry us with fines worse than the lady's steward. We all depend on that estate. So the peasants went on behalf of their commune and asked the lady not to sell the land to the innkeeper, offering her a better price for it themselves. The lady agreed to let them have it. Then the peasants tried to arrange for the commune to buy the whole estate so that it might be held by them all in common. They met twice to discuss it, but could not settle the matter. The evil one, that's the devil. The evil one sowed discord among them, and they could not agree. So they decided to buy the land individually, each according to his means, and the lady agreed to this plan as she had to the other. Now, um, Packham is a farmer, but Packham lives in Russia in the 1800s. Packham is part of a commune. He's kind of like a sharecropper. So he's going to farm a piece of land, but the vast majority of his holdings are going to go to the actual landowner. Packham has never actually owned land himself before, and the odds are that Packham learned this way of life from his father, who learned it from his father, who learned it from his father. So even though farming may be just part of the family business, none of them actually own the land that they were farming. So for Packham to be buying his own land, this is a huge thing. It's a momentous occasion for both he and his children. Now, the commune tried to buy the whole thing all together, but the evil one sowed discord. Do you know what that means? That means that he probably got into their heads and said, "You work harder than him. You deserve more." Or, "You've lived here longer. You deserve more of it." So that no matter how they talked, they were arguing and they were never going to come to an agreement. So here is the first piece that Packham wants to buy. How much land does a man need? Here we go. Presently, Packham heard that a neighbor of his was buying 50 acres, and that the lady had consented to accept one half in cash and to wait a year for the other half. Packham felt envious. Mark that as one of the sins. Look at that, thought he. The land is all being sold, and I shall get none of it. So he spoke to his wife. Other people are buying, said he, and we must also buy 20 acres or so. Life is becoming impossible. That steward is simply crushing us with his fines. So how much land does a man need? 20 acres. So they put their heads together and considered how they could manage to buy it. They had 100 rubles, so think money, laid by, they sold a colt and one half of their bees, hired out one of their sons as a laborer and took his wages in advance, borrowed the rest from a brother in law, and so scraped together half the purchase money. Having done this, Packham chose out a farm of 40 acres. Some of it would. Wait, 40 acres? I thought we said that he only needed 20 acres. He doubled the amount in less than 2 paragraphs. You can put whatever you'd like for that sin. He chose out a farm of 40 acres, some of it wooded, and went to the lady to bargain for it. They came to an agreement, and he shook hands with her upon it and paid her a deposit in advance. Then they went to town and signed the deeds, he paying half the price down and undertaking to pay the remainder within 2 years. So now Packham had land of his own. What was the cost of that land? What was the cost of that 40 acres? Well, let's look at it. They had 100 rubles, so that's the money that he had. And it's probably the entirety of the money that he had. So there's no more life savings. He's putting everything into this land. Then they sold a colt, half of their bees, those bees are used to produce honey, hired out one of their sons as a laborer, and took his wages in advance. In other words, it's kind of like dropping their kid off at McDonald's and saying, hey, go to work, and picking up his next 3 paychecks in advance. Um, I used to think this was kind of selfish, and then a student corrected me and said, but if he's the son, then he's likely going to inherit this land in the future. So this son is working toward his eventual inheritance. Borrowed the rest from a brother in law, probably the husband of that elder sister that he had to listen to earlier. This would humble him a lot, I bet, and then scrape together half the purchase money. So now Packham had land of his own. He borrowed seed and sowed it on the land he had bought. The harvest was a good one, and within a year he had managed to pay off his debts both to the lady and to his brother in law. So he became a landowner, plowing and sowing his own land, making hay on his own land, cutting his own trees, and feeding his cattle on his own pasture. When he went out to plow his fields or to look at his growing corn or at his grass meadows, his heart would fill with joy. The grass that grew and the flowers that bloomed there seemed to him unlike any that grew elsewhere. Formerly, when he had passed by that land, it appeared the same as any other land, but now it seemed quite different. We've talked about possessive pronouns recently, so I want you to look at all the possessive pronouns you see. He bought his debts, his brother in law, his own land, cutting his own trees, his cattle. Now, in a normal world, I would say this is wonderful. This is the first time that he's owned land. This is the first time that his family has owned land. But you have to think about the fact that the devil is inside of his head. And because of that, we're going to be looking very much at his pride. So Peckham was well contented, and everything would have been right if the neighboring peasants would only not have trespassed on his cornfields and meadows. He appealed to them most civilly, but they still went on. Now the communal herdsman would let the village cows stray into his meadows. Then horses from the night pasture would get among his corn. Peckham turned them out again and forgave their owners, and for a long time he forbore from prosecuting anyone. But at last he lost his patience and complained to the district court. Be wrath. He knew it was the peasants' want of land and no evil intent on their part that caused the trouble, but he thought, I cannot go on overlooking it, or they will destroy all I have. They must be taught a lesson. So he had them up, gave them one lesson, and then another, and 2 or 3 of the peasants were fined. After a time, Peckham's neighbors began to bear him a grudge for this, and would now and then let their cattle onto his land on purpose. One peasant even got into Peckham's wood at night and cut down 5 young lime trees for their bark. Peckham, passing through the wood one day, noticed something white. He came near and saw the stripped trunks lying on the ground, and close by stood the stumps where the trees had been. Peckham was furious. That would be wrath. If he had only cut one here and there, it would have been bad enough, thought Peckham, but the rascal has actually cut down a whole clump. If I could only find out who did this, I'd pay him out. I would love to know what the original word used in the Russian translation is right here, because I guarantee it's not just rascal. He racked his brains as to who it could be. Finally, he decided, must be Simon. No one else could have done it. So he went to Simon's homestead to have a look around, but he found nothing and only had an angry scene, probably because he didn't have any evidence. However, he now felt more certain than ever that Simon had done it, and he lodged a complaint. Simon was summoned, the case was tried and retried, and at the end of it all, Simon was acquitted, there being no evidence against him. Packham felt still more aggrieved, and he let his anger loose on the elder and the judges. "You let thieves grease your palms," said he. "If you were honest folk yourselves, you would not let a thief go free." How well do you think that would go over if you were accusing a judge of accepting bribes? So Packham quarreled with the judges and with his neighbors. Threats to burn his building began to be uttered. So though Packham had more land, his place in the commune was much worse than before. So how much land does a man need? 40 acres? It doesn't seem like that's good enough anymore. About this time, a rumor got about that many people were moving to new parts. "There's no need for me to leave my land," thought Packham, "but some of the others might leave our village, and then there would be more room for us. I would take over their land myself and make my estate a bit bigger. I could then live more at ease. As it is, I am still too cramped to be comfortable." He's cramped on 40 acres. Okay. One day Packham was sitting at home when a peasant passing through the village happened to call in. He was allowed to stay the night and supper was given him. Packham had a talk with this peasant and asked him where he came from. The stranger answered that he came from beyond the Volga, where he had been working. One word led to another, and the man went on to say that many people were settling in those parts. He told how some people from his village had settled there. They had joined the commune and had 25 acres per man granted them. The land was so good, he said, that the rye sown on it grew as high as a horse and so thick that 5 cuts of a sickle made a sheaf. One peasant, he said, had brought nothing with him but his bare hands, and now he had 6 horses and 2 cows of his own. Careful, careful. If it sounds too good to be true. Packham's heart kindled with desire. That would be lust. He thought, "Why should I suffer in this narrow hole if one could live so well elsewhere? I will sell my land and my homestead here. With the money, I will start afresh over there and get everything new. In this crowded place, one is always having trouble. But I must first go and find out all about it myself." Toward summer, he got ready and started. He went down the Volga on a steamer to Samara, then walked another 300 miles on foot, and at last reached the place. It was just as the stranger had said. The peasants had plenty of land. Every man had 25 acres of communal land given him for his use, and anyone who had money could buy, besides, at 2 shillings an acre, as much good freehold land as he wanted. If this dude's walking 300 miles, I do not think you're going to be able to mark sloth, which means laziness. I don't think he's lazy. Having found out all he wished to know, Packham returned home as autumn came on and began selling off his belongings. He sold his land at a profit, sold his homestead and all his cattle, and withdrew from membership of the commune. He only waited till the spring and then started with his family for the new settlement. And guys, this would be huge because, again, I guarantee you that his family has never left this property. He is likely farming the same land that his grandfathers, great grandfathers were on, and now he's moving for more property. Part 4. As soon as Packham and his family arrived at their new abode, he applied for admission into the commune of a large village. He stood treat to the elders and obtained the necessary documents. 5 shares of communal land were given him for his own and his son's use. That is to say, 125 acres, not all together, but in different fields, besides the use of the communal pasture. Packham put up the buildings he needed and bought cattle. Of the communal land alone, he had 3 times as much as at his former home, and the land was good corn land. He was 10 times better off than he had been. He had plenty of arable land and pasturage and could keep as many head of cattle as he liked. So he went from 20 acres to 40 acres to 125 acres. That's a lot of land. At first, in the bustle of building and settling down, Packham was pleased with it all. But when he got used to it, he began to think that even here he had not enough land. The first year, he sowed wheat on his share of the communal land and had a good crop. He wanted to go on sowing wheat, but had not enough communal land. He wanted to go on sowing wheat, but had not enough communal land for the purpose, and what he had already used was not available, for in those parts wheat is only sown on virgin soil or on fallow land. It is sown for 1 or 2 years, and then the land lies fallow till it is again overgrown with prairie grass. There were many who wanted such land, and there was not enough for all, so that people quarreled about it. Because if you know anything about land, you know that the land loses its nutrients if the same plot is farmed year after year after year. There were many who wanted such land there was not enough for all, so that people quarreled about it. Those who were better off wanted it for growing wheat, and those who were poor wanted it to let to dealers or rent to dealers so that they might raise money to pay their taxes. Packham wanted to sow more wheat, so he rented land from a dealer for a year. He sowed much wheat and had a fine crop, but the land was too far from the village. The wheat had to be carted more than 10 miles. After a time, Packham noticed that some peasant dealers were living on separate farms and were growing wealthy. And he thought if I were to buy some freehold land and have a homestead on it, it would be a different thing altogether. Then it would be all nice and compact. The question of buying freehold land recurred to him again and again. He went on the same way for 3 years, renting land and sowing wheat. The seasons turned out well and the crops were good, so that he began to lay money by. He might have gone on living contentedly, but he grew tired of having to rent other people's land every year and having to scramble for it. Whenever there was good land to be had, the peasants would rush for it, and it was taken up at once, so that unless you were sharp about it, you got none. It happened in the third year that he and a dealer together rented a piece of pasture land from some peasants, and they had already plowed it up when there was some dispute, and the peasants went to law about it, and things fell out so that the labor was all lost. If it were my own land, thought Packham, I should be independent and there would not be all this unpleasantness. Again, as you're going through and listening to his discontent here and arguing with a friend who are together renting something, make sure you are marking each of those sins as they are afflicting him. So Packham began looking out for land which he could buy, and he came across a peasant who had bought 1,300 acres, but having gotten into difficulties was willing to sell again cheap. Packham bargained and haggled with him, and at last they settled the price at 1,500 rubles, part in cash and part to be paid later. They had all but clinched the matter when a passing dealer happened to stop at Packham's one day to get feed for his horses. He drank tea with Packham and they had a talk. The dealer said that he was just returning from the land of the Bashkirs far away, where he had bought 13,000 acres of land, all for 1,000 rubles. Packham questioned him further, and the tradesman said, all one need do is to make friends with the chiefs. I gave away about 100 rubles worth of dressing gowns and carpets, besides a case of tea, and I gave wine to those who would drink it, and I got the land for less than 2 pence or a penny an acre. And he showed Packham the title deed, saying, the land lies near a river, and the whole prairie is virgin soil. Packham plied him with questions, and the tradesman said, there is more land there than you could cover if you walked a year, and it all belongs to the Bashkirs. They are as simple as sheep, and land can be got almost for nothing. Well, there now, thought Packham, with my 1,000 rubles, why should I only get 1,300 acres? He just said only in front of 1,300 acres. And saddled myself with a debt besides. If I take it out there, I can get more than 10 times as much for my money. Coincidence? I think not. If we go up, he was going to buy 1,300 acres for 1,500 rubles because a guy was going through pretty much a foreclosure. So Peckham was going to get a really good deal on it. But right before he paid that money, somebody just happened to come by his house. That's a very interesting coincidence, especially when he was going to buy 1,300 and now he was offered 13,000. Those numbers are too coincidental not to be connected. So you know Packham's going. Here he goes. Packham inquired how to get to the place, and as soon as the tradesman had left him, he prepared to go there himself. He left his wife to look after the homestead and started on his journey with taking his man with him. He even has a servant now. That's how far he's come through life and with money. They stopped at a town on their way and bought a case of tea, some wine, and other presents as the tradesman had advised. On and on they went until they had gone more than 300 miles, and on the seventh day, like 40 some miles a day. That's impressive. He is not lazy. On the seventh day, they came to a place where the Bashkirs had pitched their tents. It was all just as the tradesman had said. The people lived on the steppes by a river in felt covered tents. They neither tilled the ground nor ate bread. Their cattle and mares were driven to them twice a day. The mares were milked, and from the milk kumis was made. It was the women who prepared kumis, and they made cheese. As far as the men were concerned, drinking kumis and tea, eating mutton, and playing on their pipes was all they cared about. They were all stout and merry, and all summer long they never thought of doing any work. They were quite ignorant and knew no Russian, but were good natured enough. This kumis is an alcoholic milk drink. Yuck. But that's what they were doing all day long. As soon as they saw Peckham, they came out of their tents and had gathered round their visitor. An interpreter was found, and Peckham told them he had come about some land. The Bashkirs seemed very glad. They took Peckham and led him into one of the best tents where they made him sit down on some down cushions placed on a carpet while they sat round him. They gave him tea and kumis and had a sheep killed and gave him mutton to eat. Peckham took presents out of his cart and distributed them among the Bashkirs and divided amongst them their tea. The Bashkirs were delighted. They talked a great deal among themselves and then told the interpreter to translate. They wish to tell you, said the interpreter, that they like you, and that it is our custom to do all we can to please a guest and to repay him for his gifts. You have given us presents. Now tell us which of the things we possess please you best, that we may present them to you. What pleases me best here, answered Peckham, is your land. Our land is crowded and the soil is exhausted, but you have plenty of land, and it is good land. I never saw the like of it. The interpreter translated. The Bashkirs talked among themselves for a while. Peckham could not understand what they were saying, but saw that they were much amused and that they shouted and laughed. Then they were silent and looked at Peckham while the interpreter said, they wish me to tell you that in return for your presents, they will gladly give you as much land as you want. You have only to point it out with your hand, and it is yours. The Bashkirs talked again for a while and began to dispute. Peckham asked what they were disputing about, and the interpreter told him that some of them thought they ought to ask their chief about the land and not act in his absence, while others thought there was no need to wait for his return. Okay, so he is told there is this really amazing land 300 miles away where you could get 13,000 acres only for 1,000 rubles, plus a couple bribes. Packham's like, whoo, and he goes there. The moment that he gets there, these Bashkirs who are sitting around all day long, not doing any work and being pretty drunk, were super excited to see him. The problem is, all of their communication is happening through an interpreter. So they're not having direct conversation. And anytime that they are having conversation amongst themselves, Packham cannot understand it. The part that would disconcert me, the part that would bother me, well, there are lots of things that would bother me. There are lots of things that I would see like giant red flags flashing, but Packham is so focused on the land that he's missing some of these signs. The fact that every time that they discuss things about him, that they shouted and laughed. How do you feel when you get laughed at? Probably uncomfortable. And Peckham, again, is so focused on this land that he's not seeing these things. But right now, he's not going to get any of the land until their chief shows up. So the next video is going to discuss what happens when their chief shows up.